Hi everyone, and welcome to Creativity Reframed. It's a series of chats that I'm having with colleagues that I've worked with in the past, interesting people, creative and business leaders, to talk about what they're doing to make sense of COVID from a creativity and from a problem-solving point of view. I think as we'll all be seeing, what this is actually throwing out are some actually really interesting opportunities and new ways to work when we come through the other side of this. Joining me in this session, I am delighted to have with me someone that I worked with a long time ago, but I had a blast working with, as I remember correctly. That is the delightful Greg James, who joins me today from New York, where he is the Global Chief Strategy Officer at the Havas Media Group. So Greg, lovely to see you.
Great to see you, Dawn. It's lovely to see you. It's a nice start to my day from New York.
Excellent. It's a new dawn. So I think just first off, from a personal and a professional point of view, how are you getting through COVID-19?
So I'm actually really lucky in the scheme of things from a personal point of view, because we've been able to kind of escape the city a little bit, move upstate. We're in the country, we're ensconced in the house, we're pretty well looked after, and we've been here for 12 weeks today, I think. So in some senses, that's good. I mean, last year I spent 5 months outside the country in a global role. You're traveling a lot. And so actually spending 12 weeks in one place with my own family. But I think, like everybody, personally and professionally, the social isolation part of this, the fact that you just don't have this freedom to go and do what you want and see who you want, it is really difficult. And I think, like everybody, you have this sort of roller coaster of emotions. You go through the 12 weeks and you're having a good week or a bad week, and everybody's had that moment sitting on the bed and crying from it and then picking themselves up and going on. So, but I feel like you've got to be optimistic about it, and you can't complain about it when you're fortunate, because obviously a lot of people are going through a hell of a lot on COVID, and in the US right now in lots of other ways in the last week or two as well.
And I guess just in terms of creativity and problem solving from a business point of view, what stuff have you been able to do personally through the work that you're doing at Havas, where you think actually, because of perhaps COVID, it's got you to create something different or make something different or think differently?
Yeah, so I was thinking about this. When you and I worked together, it was 10, 12 years ago. And that was when I was inside Cake. And Cake was a really, really creative agency to work in. But interestingly, never actually had a creative department. The business was never built with creative and planning and account like traditional agencies would have been. And it sort of gave me a perspective on the world, which I think is really good from that. Because I think once you say in any business, this person is the creative, it inherently means these people are not the creative, or they're not creative. You know, people don't feel they've got permission to be creative. And I was thinking about it because through this process, through COVID in the last couple of months, obviously the output of the business has been less about, do we have a creative idea to solve this problem? And it's been more functional creativity. It's been, how can you be creative in a meeting, or how can you be creative with the format, right? If everything's happening via Zoom, what is it that you can do to seize some kind of creativity? If you define creativity as inspiring people, engaging people, as much as it's about having an idea. And I think what I've been impressed by in that sense is there's some of the detail stuff people have done. Everybody's had to learn Zoom and get creative, like how does a meeting work and who do you format that? We've gone through 2 pitches during this. So we've had Teams meetings and Zoom meetings with 90 people on a Zoom. And you've had to figure out, all right, well, how do you signify that visually? What should it look like? What does my icon look like? Does it all look the same? And then how do you format the conversation and keep people engaged? And it's been impressive to see kind of people bring creative energy, I would say, right? If that makes sense. Sort of like tell when you're in these Zoom chats with 10 people, like there's an energy about certain people. And it's not just because a couple of people have turned up wearing the funny hat or put the filter of the potato on, whatever. It's actually just how they spark from other people in the conversation.
Yeah.
And I think that, whilst it's a slightly tangential definition of creativity, it's been a good, like what creative means to people, and particularly what it means in trying circumstances, let's say.
I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? I think in terms of, given that Zoom has almost become our go-to mechanism communication, it's almost how do you innovate within the context of how you're even using Zoom, I think is really interesting, isn't it? And as you say, one would never have imagined pictures and things ever happening remotely, and certainly not with those volumes of people involved as well. I've been through a brand DNA ideation piece of planning over the last week, which again, by what we've been able to do is because we've been forced to do it remotely, it's actually got us doing all kinds of really cool things we would never have done before had we been in that more traditional face-to-face 10 people in a room context. So I love the idea of you see difficulty and you almost make it better when you come through the other side of it.
I think it's focused people in a different way. So I joined a session last night with some people, and one of the people hosting this discussion was a trained coach, so had techniques for how do you get people to engage in things, particularly because she was talking about a complicated subject and trying to get people to, like, how do you talk about difficult things like the social issues that we're seeing right now. And she's just being focused by saying, give me 3 words that you felt about that, or okay, then you reflect on those things. When it comes to the business, when you're pitching or trying to ideate, it's also meant that there's a lot of clutter when it comes to things like creative ideation, right? Because you give people need freedom, you need the space to go and think about things, but sometimes there's just all this stuff going on and distractions. I think when it's coming to happen via Zoom, you're turning up at 1 p.m. or 9 a.m. or whatever it is to say, this is my answer. You have to be more focused, and it forces people to be accountable in some ways. Use your time however you like, but just be ready at 10 a.m. to tell me that thing. You've got a deadline and there's something accountable about how people are working, which I think is really interesting.
Are there any kind of brands that you've kind of thought, wow, they're doing something really interesting through this in a way that's meaningful?
What's been interesting to me is to see how brands react globally differently, right? So I'm sitting in the US as a British person, so I'm relatively skeptical. And you saw brands very quickly move to flag waving, patriotic messaging, which actually works for a lot of America, but wouldn't really work for Northerners like you and me that are much more skeptical about life. So I think brands that you'd expect, like, so the big marquee brands like Ford went quickly into the let's go back to normal place. I think the work that someone like Nike's done in the last week creatively with the idea of don't do it and that viral piece, it's typically Nike in terms of like a sentiment people could A, be social with, and B, it's a very bold move for a brand. I think what we're trying to do with brands when we're educating them is like walk them through the process of like, what are the steps and stages that you've got to go through of accepting this is happening, beginning to rebuild, and then going back out to the market. So those brands that have gone dark, have to figure out the right way to come back. So I don't know. I don't think there's one hero winning brand personally. And I think it's a very sensitive brands to figure out what to do. And in the US now, with the social side of what's happening versus the COVID side of what's happening, that's even more complex. And it's not right really for commercially to be in the middle of that all the time.
100%. And final question already, Greg. I think this is always really important. On a very philosophical level, what have you learned about yourself through this whole process?
Well, there's a flippant answer to that, which is just how much I don't focus and how much I snack through the day, having worked at home now and just wandered around and lack that sort of focus. Actually, the biggest thing I've learned is around focus. It is actually about the fact that we can't fix these massive issues around issues like health from COVID, issues like race that we're seeing now as discussion, but everybody plays a part in it. And you have to be convinced that you can say, there's something I can do, and then do it wholeheartedly. Because I think that it's caused me, there's been a lot of self-reflection through this. And I think there's things that I felt and thought in the last 12 months that I was like, oh, I'm not sure about that. And when I look back on them, I think I should have done that. And I should have done it harder and been more convicted and passionate about saying, that's what I believe and that's what we should do. And I was proven, I was right 6 months or 12 months ago. And I wish I'd stuck to my guns more. And I think this gives me that. It's taught me that I need to be more, it's not that I need to be more passionate, but it's that I need to be more committed when I believe something to make the thing happen, or go convince people more, because you're probably right.
Absolutely, Greg. I think that is all completely relevant. And I think some really good shout outs there in terms of, I think Nike always, I think, are doing interesting things. And I think, as you say, I think those brands that have backed out are going to have to re-emerge in some shape or form. I think that's going to be really challenging. And as you say, not least in the US right now. So that's it. We're at the end of our conversation, Greg. So it's been lovely to chat to you. Thank you so much for joining me today and sharing all of your sage advice.
Thanks for having me. It's been great to see you. It's been great.
My pleasure. Okay, take it easy out there.